Welcome, everyone. My name is Ellen Duong. I will be presenting today on SOMA, a pain and recovery symptom tracking app, and specifically on our considerations in creating our mobile application for research. Oh, not done presenter view before. Do I have to click here? Okay, cool. So the agenda for today is that we're going to go over kind of the research, the motivation for creating SOMA, as well as the app, how it's used by users and researchers, and how SOMA is furthering studies on pain recovery. Then we'll kind of go into the bulk of the presentation, which is about the research design and technical considerations. We've had to compromise kind of on our research goals, our design and technical aspects of the project. And here are going to be some of the major decision points that we made throughout that development process. And then there'll be a little bit about project management and implementation tools that we've used throughout, as well as kind of what we're up to next in our release phase. And currently SOMA is for use and it's out there in the world. And so these are just some exciting things to be looking forward to. So let's start with kind of the motivation for this. So the motivation for this is kind of, here's like the size of the chronic pain problem crisis in the US. So currently, 1 in 5 US adults suffers from chronic pain. The biggest part of that is chronic back and neck pain, which are the most common and expensive, costing $134.5 billion annually. And as well, and then like the fuller, bigger picture is that 50 million people are partially or fully disabled by their pain, and that annual cost is $560 to $630 billion a year. So chronic pain is a hugely costly problem and also just a huge problem in general. So that's kind of where that is. Kind of bridging on that, things that we kind of wanted to look into in terms of, 1 second. Oh no. I had pressed the wrong button, but it's okay. We're gonna do this again. We're gonna move this and go here. So to kind of look into that, we wanted to kind of create a study to kind of look on that, as well as how would we kind of implement that through our app, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the kind of first part about designing that kind of study was this first one, which is predicting acute chronic pain transition. So in our general study, we're looking at 500 patients with any kind of acute pain, which is pain less than 3 months, and 200 chronic pain patients who have a pain duration of greater than 6 months. And the goal is to kind of use measures of pain variability, activity data, treatments used, mood fluctuations, and predictions, expectations for the next day acquired, kind of via SOMA, which we'll talk about, and kind of predict who in the acute group will recover versus the transition to chronic pain over the 4 months of a study. So that's kind of one of the kind of tying things that kind of booned into this, creating this application as well. And we can talk about the sub-study as well for that, which will be predicting response to interventional spine treatments. And this sub-study of that larger study will also similarly use the data that we're going to collect in our app and baseline EEG measures to predict the degree of pain relief that someone with chronic back pain gets from common interventional spine procedures such as radio frequency ablation, spinal cord stimulation, and back surgery 4 to 12 months after their procedure. Yes. Slowly. Cool. Awesome. Cool. So those are kind of the two kind of general studies that we were kind of looking into in creating this app. And then so creating a pain and recovery symptom tracking app, kind of the things that we wanted to do were to track symptoms and treatments, identify patterns, and then later on, you can see that these three are kind of grayed out. In our kind of next release, we'll be doing things like diagnostic tests, cognitive interventions, or behavioral interventions. We wanted this to be free of use, data protection and encryption, and have it be accessible. And for researchers, we wanted to be able to conduct research studies, test the efficacy of interventions, as well as reduce bias, again, having that data and accessibility and kind of aligning with the American Psychological Association standards. Yeah. So we'll go into kind of the design for this app, which was made in collaboration with RISD students, as well as paying patient interviews. We'll kind of go into that in a little bit, but this is kind of our first glimpse at what the app looks like. There's this user registration screen that says, "Hello, I'm Soma. I will be your companion throughout your pain and recovery journey." By going through this, it kind of prompts you in kind of this onboarding chatbot kind of way to kind of get more information about you, your pain journey, as well as kind of where you are in that. And then from there, you head into check-ins, which are kind of how you'll record your pain, mood, activities, and other things like that. And seeing all of that kind of laid out in trends. And so this was kind of worked on in Adobe XD. And from that, the RISD students and the researchers collaborated a lot, kind of trying to figure out design as well as usability by the users, as well as trying to figure out, does it make sense in terms of this flow? So some things in the app you'll see here. Ooh, hold on. I need to move my mouse over there. Is that the first kind of part is tracking the symptoms and treatments. So in our check-in screen, we'll be collecting scores on pain, mood, activity, treatments, and expectations. So I'll let this play. So the thing is, like, in every evening, the users will kind of go through an evening routine. They'll talk about how you feel during the day, as well as how you were feeling throughout the entire day. So it's kind of both how are you feeling in this moment, but also kind of how did you feel over the course of the day, as well as what activities did you do today? So in this case, work, study, and activities. And then seeing how those activities made you feel. And this is kind of recording from the design document. The actual app has changed slightly since then. But users are also asked about the intensity of their pain and how unpleasant their pain was in that day. And this part they'll ask about kind of like pain treatments and pain medications. In the current app, this screen actually got moved into 2 screens because there were actually a lot. to kind of list on both avenues. In this screen, users get to pinpoint kind of where their pain is located on their bodies. Today, there's also an option to say that I do not have a clear pain location. And then these are more specific questions on how these activities affected pain levels. And then there's a planning for tomorrow. So we kind of see like plans that people had for tomorrow versus activities they actually ended up doing today. So by kind of using that data, there's that. But yeah, so there's a couple of questions from right now, today, and then kind of what you'll end up doing tomorrow. I think that's the end of that video. Yeah, cool. And then the second part of it is tracking, identifying those patterns. So the trends screen that you'll see will actually show kind of over time changes in pain frequency, mood, the effect of activities on mood, as well as the effect of activities on pain, and as well as a pain location map located down here. So this is like the activity, so the effect of pain is in orange and such. And then depending on, you can kind of see between 1 week, 1 month, 4 months, and I think we've in the app, we now cap it to like 1 year. But this is kind of a way for you to be able to identify your patterns and maybe share with your care providers kind of how your pain has changed over the course of time. So that was the app. So let's talk more now about kind of now talking about our development process throughout this. So this is kind of the nice roadmap where you kind of go from research to design, scoping and technical decisions, design, implementation, testing, app release, and then data analysis. This is kind of the roadmap of that. Something that was kind of in the beginning we wanted to do was get feedback from pain patients who will use the app as well. So from that, so pain patients with a variety of pain were invited for in-depth interviews about the designs of SOMA. From there, we gathered information on factors affecting pain, factors affecting mood, how they spend their time. They were able to give feedback on the overall app, such as that evening routine check-ins and trends page, and suggestions from that time that kind of got put into the designs were some wording changes in rating pain, some prompting whether mood was better or worse than the day before, additional factors to track that they were interested in, kind of seeing different factors across time. And then kind of, there's also a summary page for the check-in page that was not shown in the videos, but it's kind of after you finish a check-in, you get a summary report of what you filled out for that one. And then those same pain patients were invited to take part in beta testing later on. Yeah. Yes.
Sample of patients.
Yes.
Where patients chose to participate in this.
Yeah. So the question for Zoom was, how were the pain patients chosen for these pain patient interviews? Chloe? Yeah, so for Zoom, there was a collaboration with patients at Lifespan, as well as that we had put posters up, and people who have responded to the posters also were asked about feedback as well. Cool. Thank you. One of the biggest things that we had to do was, oh wow, the colors have changed on this screen. That's okay. um, was that we had to translate our wants into needs. And not only that, we also had to um kind of cull our wants because we couldn't get everything that we wanted into the app. So we had to compromise on research, design, tech, and user needs. So some of the things that we identified that we wanted and needed, where we needed to collect data. And so that kind of came about as those check-in responses, as well as when you're going through that screen, every click that you do, that is also recorded. So we record how long a user spends on a screen. We record each kind of click they end up doing in terms of the activity screens, whether they selected something, deselected something, things like that. So that's kind of timestamps of user interaction. In terms of like security encryption, we'll go into data in a future slide, so hold on. There's authentication, and we use like a secure database and communicating through that. We want users to engage with our app and use it in their day-to-day. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we gravitated towards mobile development, because people use their phones every day. And it's also something we all wanted to make an app that was aesthetically pleasing as that people wanted to interact with every day. And having notifications kind of prompts users to engage with the app as well. So those were kind of like big things that we wanted to have in our app. Another thing is to kind of have this app a little bit more personable, because this is not only just an app for researchers, but it's actually going to be an app that users can use for their care, because there will be general users, since it is available to the App Store as well as the Google Play Store. So anyone can download our app. So kind of there we have kind of that chatbot that kind of makes it a little bit more personal to you in terms of inputting your data, as well as being able to track your data over time. So that's kind of the trend screen there. Later on, there'll be more personalization options in like versions like 2 and on. Right now, we are a little bit trying to get kickstarted a bit up on the research side. And then kind of right now we're working on data analysis. So we spent a good amount of time on our database structure. How do we structure putting our users? What do we store on our studies? What do we store on like our responses? And kind of having a good database structure kind of helps when we go into the pre and post processing era of that data. I promised about data. All right, so this is kind of the data flow for a general user. You kind of start with your phone, and it communicates with our database via a REST API, and that's an authenticated kind of route. The phone communicates to our database to ask for things like is this user actually on our database? So like logging in, we have to ask our database, oh, does this user exist? Oh, they exist, cool. That's the right username and password. All right, they've authenticated, and now as a user, now I have information. I now can have access to information about trends and other things like that. So that's information that the phone is asking the database for, and the database is then transferring over to the phone. On the phone, there's local storage on the phone, which are just general things like application settings, like whether or not I already went through the tutorial. when you first log on and first make an account, you'll go through kind of a tutorial saying, hey, this is how you use our app. And then once you're done, you say, oh, completed tutorial. And that's saved on the phone, not in our database. So those are kind of where data is stored for a general user. For users that are kind of in our, for research, this is kind of our high level diagram of that, where it kind of starts down here with the researcher and institution, where we send participants an app ID and a study ID that they'll be able to enroll in a specific study on the SOMA app, and that gets put into our app. And then every time that they fill out a check-in, other things like that, that study data gets saved into our backend, and the researchers then can receive that study-specific data and use post-processing scripts, pre and post-processing scripts for data analysis, and that is available for them right now. That's currently what we're working on there. So that's kind of at a high level for that. So we're going to go from this diagram to this one. So so more in depth of how that works is that these participants get sent a Qualtrics. So this is kind of their registration and getting in some clinical data. And then they get a participant ID. In this Qualtrics, they also fill out things like demographics, pre-registration surveys, and follow-ups as well. They get a participant ID, which then on our Brown servers, we have this mapping file that maps their participant ID to their app ID, and their app ID is what they use on our database or on their phone. So cool. So in that mapping file is kind of where we'll be communicating kind of between our app data database and kind of moving that data to the researchers in that folder, and that data gets processed afterwards. Yes, Max. Yes. So the question was, how does the mapping file work? So currently what happens is I get a request for make this study and with all of these app IDs, and the researchers kind of handle the like participant to app ID file. So they have that file knowing like who will be associated with what, and then I create the study on our end. So in our database, all we have for a study is the study ID and a list of app IDs. In our database, we don't know about the participant IDs. Does that help? Cool. Yes, Maddie. Yeah. So for Zoom, summary of what Maddie said is kind of that mapping file is kind of a way to kind of map the Qualtrics data with our app study data as well. But it's basically currently manually done, that file. Cool. And then for from that general user's perspective, remember we had our database and we had the phone. So for the research participants, that's the same. And then also, we also have in the database an the app ID as well as the study enrollment. So those are the two added things that are saved in our database for a research participant. But otherwise, that's the same for the questions here. Yes, George.
So PPID is unique to that.
Yes.
The app ID, they can be involved with kind of things. So it could like one PPID and
Okay. So the question for Zoom was, can there be what is the PPID unique to, as well as can a user be enrolled in multiple studies? So currently the PPID here is for each study. Yes. There are multiple studies running on the app, and a user can be enrolled in multiple studies. So they would have like a set of like study ID and app ID for each study that they're enrolled in. They cannot enroll in the same study twice. I tried that and I made sure it couldn't happen. Cool. All right. So that's kind of the data flow. Let's take a look at our backend architecture, because now we're kind of getting into like how we decided our backend and things like that. So currently, right now, this is our backend architecture where we have our database as MongoDB in a Brown virtual machine VM. And then that is connected to these two servers in Kubernetes that are deployed in Kubernetes. There is an API server, which is kind of the connection of like, I knew I had an explanation for this. Okay. Breathe. Sorry. So our database talks to our API server, and that's kind of that connection point between the phone and the database. So our phone will ask via the API server, our database, for things like authentication of like logging in for a user specific data and things like that. And then the database can push, can give back via the API server kind of that response of like, oh, okay, cool, that is valid, you can log in. Oh, here's your data for the user. And then there's this separate notification server where the database, where the notification server kind of stores some information in our database, and going from our database of turning like when are your notification settings set for, it communicates and pushes those notifications onto our phone. So that is a communication strictly to the phone and not something from the phone back to that server. So that's kind of the two servers we're running right now. So that is where we ended up in terms of what we have right now. Now let's talk about those decisions that got us there. So here are our backend decisions. In the very beginning, we had looked into tools such as MindLamp. We evaluated like other technologies in the health space, but kind of databases there were not as flexible as we needed. We had initially looked into Firebase, and which is another service. And we had concerns on like Google holding the data, we were initially trying to try out different login methods that were unsupported by Firebase. We didn't want to be in a vendor lock-in. But now we actually do have a Firebase because we had to do it for push notifications for Android. So that's something there. We ended up on using MongoDB, which offered kind of that maximum flexibility instead of a traditional database. And we were able to kind of design more how we wanted and iterate a little bit more quickly through that. So that's kind of how we ended up at MongoDB. Our front-end decisions, we looked at native code, progressive web applications, React Native, and Flutter. Native code kind of means like what the code for like your Apple iPhone is written in, and or what your Android phone is written in. But since they use two different languages and things like that, that would mean we would have to develop code separately. And we really didn't want to have two code bases because that kind of just increases the development time. Another thing to look into was progressive web applications, which is essentially an app on your phone that is essentially a web app. But that had limited support for hardware APIs, and that is something that we may want to branch into later on. And there were restrictions on how that could be listed in the App Store. Flutter was an option, but at the time we were looking at this was very new and it was not mature enough, and there were not enough like user UI components. So we ended up using React Native and Expo, and this was kind of that sweet spot about maintaining one code base that supports iOS, Android, and web. It had a lot of built-in features such as notifications, status bars, and kind of just a lot of good defaults that we could leverage and spend more time kind of on our app-specific features. And there were a lot of good tools for the developer experience as well, such as kind of like having a whole emulator kind of startup and kind of like a hot reloading process, so that if I made a change in the code base, then that was reflected in the emulator really quickly, and that kind of helped facilitate that iteration process. So I gave you that initial roadmap that looks kind of nice. Here's a little bit of the timeline of our development on how kind of that happened. I would say that it was pretty much lots of like upwards movement. There were moments of slow times that kind of took some time. This project has kind of been over the course of the development process been over like 2 years at this point. Our staffing has changed at the top, so you kind of see how we've grown and changed to kind of keep up with these developments. It kind of all started with Frederica Peschner's appointment and startup grant for Brainstorm as well. And kind of in this beginning couple of months, wait, I have a mouse. We were doing a lot of research, doing our development, and then this is kind of where we really start developing a little bit more. And at this time, like our design is updating and we're trying out different features, like does this slider component make sense? Does this help text make sense? And so because of this updating, we are developing, but also the design is updating. So this is kind of where we kind of take a little slow and kind of learn a lot from that. And then there's kind of moments where the design gets more refined. And we blow past our initial milestone and actually release much later on, but we got to take a lot more time in testing and a bit of our notifications refactor as well. So there was a lot of things that happened in these like 2 years, and more than I put in this slide. Some of the tools that we used were GitHub, which is kind of where we put our code base, as well as some of our project board management there. We had weekly team meetings. We had weekly dev sync meetings between just the developers to kind of be kind of code buddies with each other and kind of help out where we're stuck, where we're things like that. We added labels to all of these things. Researchers also had access to this board as well, and it was very helpful to kind of get comments from them and kind of link it directly to our board as well. So that was kind of a way of like how we set priorities both on this board, but also within our meetings with researchers. I talked a little bit about that rescoping kind of thing, is that this is something that kind of kept churning as we were going through. We kept needing to prioritize our needs and cull our wants, figuring out what features were needed, as well as how can we design this in a way that still makes sense, but is also not too development heavy, because we wanted to get more features done. The design document was something that was ever updating, and as well as we learned about like technical limitations of what we could do, especially with mobile development. There were a lot of things that were, especially with notifications, that was like, you can't implement notifications in sorry. I think what I'm trying to say is that notifications work differently for both the your iPhone than it is for Android. So because of that, we ran into different issues on both sides. And from that, we had to keep kind of working on that. We had to, as our team grew and changed, we reconfigured our communication lines. And that meant like, what meetings are relevant to us? What did we need in terms of our development team, our Slack channels, and kind of figuring out that source of truth. Because I think there was also a moment in time where like there was versions of information that everyone had, but at different stages of it. I think there was a time that I was working on a very old design document and there was a very new design document. So kind of smoothing it out and kind of keeping up to date with those sources of truth was kind of really helpful. Estimating software development time is really hard. We had these quarterly scope meetings of like, oh, we think we'll be done with our front end development at this point, or we assume that our testing will only take like a few weeks. I think we ended up testing for a few months, like 2 months, I think. Also something that we had to do was kind of a refactor a little bit of our code base as well, because as we were developing, we were moving fast, collecting some technical debt, which is kind of, we made some decisions, acted on those, and then now realizing, oh, maybe those decisions that we made back then are not actually what we need now. And this is kind of ever present in our project. And kind of looking at that testing, what that looks like is that we got to test on emulators, like an iPhone simulator and an Android Design Studio simulator as well. We were able to test locally. We used a tool called Postman that we were able to test those calls to our backend. Some of the challenges that we faced here were notifications, because you can't test it on an emulator. You actually need a physical phone to test them on. User registration in terms of authenticating that with our backend, as well as enrolling in a study more than once, or all of these like little edge cases that we kind of had to handle. The differences between Android and iOS, although Expo kind of aligned them as much as they could, there were still differences that I encountered having tested only iPhone and then pulling it up on Android and realizing it was completely different. Another challenge is internet connectivity, because it's on a mobile phone. People travel, people go to different time zones, people have different, like, this is like a good space of Wi-Fi, but if I go into a park, I don't really have like it kind of depends on, like, there were just like a lot of challenges. And that's, yes, hi, hello. Hi, Paul.
I'm going through, I'm doing checking. Funnel use connectivity. Is the information I've stored like local to the device, and is it same once it's done, and how's that?
Yeah, so currently we advise people to be on good internet terms when using the app. And we are working on, as a future feature, to be able to betterly handle low connectivity situations. Beta testing. So we recruited 30 beta testers. Some of them are here. Hello, lovely beta testers on various phone sizes and iOS and OSs. And these included pain patients, people in tech, researchers, and just like a general audience. If you had responded to kind of one of our posters, you kind of also got invited to work on it daily. These users were asked to use the app daily, so try out the evening check-ins, use the app as you normally would, and then stress test everything, and stress test they did. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So each release that we did had a description of changes and updates to test, because as people were testing, we needed to do some updates. People reported bugs via the Google form, feedback surveys, and they also submitted in some feature requests. There was a mailing list of over 160 pain patients who over the last year indicated they wanted to hear about SOMA when it was announced, and they were also invited to provide feedback. So let's talk about that feedback. Oh man, not all of it's random. Okay, anyway, here are some quotes from the feedback that we received. I wish there was a way to change what time it notified you for the evening routine. So currently, every day you'll get a notification at 6 p.m. Saying, hey, time to complete your evening routine. However, a lot of people either have, that is not their evening routine, and then they might have nighttime shifts, night shifts, like they work at night, or they have kind of different schedules as well. And this is a planned and incoming feature to be able to adjust that notification time. Another feedback that we got was these items are incorrectly displayed, and a screenshot was also sent in. And so this kind of led to a refactor of those icons. Anyway, during this time, over 40 support issues were created, and those included things like display issues, because I used an emulator and I tested on like 2 phones, but these testers had like old phones, new phones. It was a time. They talked about some user flow issues, trying to like, how did I navigate from logging in to forgetting my password to resetting that and things like that. And we had a whole issue with forgetting password and getting that to work. There were some platform specific issues between Android and iOS. There were crash reports fixed. These issues were then labeled and prioritized kind of depending on the severity of the issue. And that kind of meant does this break our app? Is this something that a user needs to be able to do? Is this some data that we need to collect? And kind of through that feedback, we gained insight on how users use the app every day and how personalizable they wanted the app to be. And it was kind of really cool to kind of see people like really wanting to use the app for themselves, you know? Cool. We have like a little more. But now it's been released on the App Store and the Play Store. Submitting an app for release was also a bit of a challenge. We had to make sure we abided by the submission guidelines provided by Apple and provided by Google. This is kind of the marketing material as well for the app. And we had to create accounts for testers, and Apple sent us back with different rounds of feedback saying, hey, you need to allow users to initiate deletion of their data through the app, as well as some other requirements that they needed. And kind of through that process, it kind of not only it kind of takes time for us to do each release of the app. From there, we have promotion and outreach. Currently, kind of within Brown, we've sent this app through newsletters at Kearney, the alumni newsletter. It was covered by the Brown Daily Herald. And then outside of Brown, it's been covered by the Boston Globe. There'll be an ad in the RI Monthly. There's a social media outreach. And then as well as there's a paper in preprint that was submitted to a conference. And then there's in-person events. So you might see them at a booth at some events, such as like a brain fair or things like that. I meant to put in the photo. I promise I forgot. But that was a lot of fun as well. Things that are happening next is kind of the data analysis portion of this project. And so that's kind of cleaning of and post-processing of data. We need to kind of go back and look at the maintenance and addressing some of that technical debt that we've built up. This app, we're going to be pushing for some accessibility features, especially seeing how this is an app about chronic pain. We are going to continue the press release, advertising, and marketing the app, and working on designs for version 2, which includes general interventions, as well as internationalization, which is support for multiple languages and countries. So that's kind of what's up and coming for SOMA. I want to say thank you to our wonderful team. Some of them are here with us, but that's it. Questions? Hello, George. How many users? Oh, I meant to make that a slide. Maddie, what are the latest numbers? Yeah. So we currently have around like what is it, like 190, you would say, users? 190 users currently. And we released last month, right? March? Yeah. I think we released in March, and we're now starting to get people enrolled in studies, and starting to really outreach for more. Yes, Max. Yeah. Oh, that decision was made before before I started working on this project, and I wish Brad was here. George. Yeah, so I think currently, right now, the incentive is tracking their data over time, seeing that trend screen, and that's kind of not only, it's kind of like data that you're collecting like daily and something that you could bring into one of your appointments saying, hey, this is how my pain has changed over the course of X amount of days. In future implementations, there can be a reward system, gamification of kind of using the app. That's something that's being designed. Oh yeah. Participants get paid. It's true. Yes, Max. No, this is our first mobile app at CCV. There's a second one that we're in the process of for public health. This is a Paul question. Is it a Paul question? That's an anyone? Oh, will we do, okay, I guess the question for Zoom is mobile development something CCV will continue doing? Yeah, can you take it, Paul? Yeah, before working on this app, I had not done mobile development before. Well, I did do a really small app when I was in college. Does that count? Oh, okay, cool. I learned a lot. I learned a lot. It's still learning. 'Cause I know the app's released, but I'm still in it. Okay. Awesome. Well, I don't know if there were any questions on Zoom or anything, but if anyone has questions, you can always reach out to me or download the app and find a bug and send it to me. Yay. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Carolyn, for joining. Oh, as well as Peach and Christoph. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, now I need to figure out Zoom controls.